prime wilderness moved from the U.S. House to the Senate today. Democratic Senator Paul Wellstone asked federal mediators to step into the fray over the BWCA in Voyageurs National Park. And Republican Senator Rod Graham said he will soon introduce his own bill. All of this on the heels of dueling bills introduced by two Minnesota House Democrats who usually agree with each other. Jim Oberstar, of course, wants to loosen regulations on motorized vehicles and turn control over to local citizens. Bruce Vento wants to extend the wilderness. Now, it's apparent the battle over the boundary waters in Voyageurs National Park would take no political prisoners before it's through. The newsmakers of the day, Senators Wellstone and Graham, join us from Washington. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hi, Kathy.
Good evening, Kathy.
Senator Wellstone, first question to you. Why call in federal mediators into a very controversial issue that really elected officials could probably take care of?
Well, first of all, to avoid the wrangling, Kathy, we saw what happened in 1978, and we can do a lot better. I mean, right now where we're heading with these different bills is a polarized state, bitterness, hatred, divisiveness. I love this state, and I love the regions, and I know the people. I happen to be in a position of knowing the people on both sides, and I have said to everybody, look, we can do better in Minnesota. This alternative dispute resolution works. No one is going to be shut out. The mediation is going to take place. People are going to be assembling the parties at the end of the week. The mediators are going to, there's going to be a team of them. Calls are going to be made. And what I've said to people, Kathy, is look, far better than having a state at war with itself. 99% of the people in our state want to see some dispute resolution. Sit down with skilled mediators. It's been done around the country in other environmental disputes. We've learned a lot since '78 and work out a solution. Build the consensus, and we got a much better chance of getting something positive done and avoiding a state that's just ripped apart. I don't want to see that happen as a senator from Minnesota.
A cynic, Senator Wellstone, might say that you introduced this idea of federal mediation because you're afraid to take a position on the boundary waters, that you're afraid of undermining your support among environmentalists and the good DFLers of the 8th District.
Well, there's one part of that that's true, which is that I have strong support in the metro area and in northern Minnesota. There are many environmentalists. I think all the people in this dispute are environmentalists. But I will tell you, I'm not too worried about my position. I am worried about Minnesota, and I think it is absolutely the responsible thing to bring people together and to work this dispute out. It can happen. People who haven't talked to each other for 18 years owe it to themselves to do it. They owe it to our state, and as senators, we owe it to our state to call on people to work this out before this just explodes. I mean, I would say to Rob, we can work together on this. I mean, Jim Oberstar is supporting it. Bruce Vento is supporting it. They have very different views. People on both sides of the equation have said, look, we're skeptical. People always are before mediation, but we're going to give it our best shot. That's what should happen. And I would say to Rod, I hope that he will join in supporting this. Let's avoid the bitterness and the hatred. Let's try to get people sitting down through mediation and come up with positive change.
Let's ask Senator Graham what he thinks of...
I've been pretty quiet here, haven't I, Ken?
You have been. Let's go ahead and ask you, what do you think about federal mediation for this problem?
Well, I think when we talk about division and hatred or anger up in northern Minnesota, it's because of just tactics like this, of putting another study in there, another bureaucratic step, so people don't have to make a decision on what's going on there. You know, Kathy, we held 2 hearings last year, and we got a 341-page report. We had over 2,000 people crammed into rooms. We had 9 hours of hearings. We had 6 Minnesota delegates, or a delegation of 6 members at these hearings, 9 hours. We're trying to do the job that Congress is supposed to do. And all this mediation board would do, and by the way, it's a labor mediation board and not something that is really qualified to handle this type of dispute, it was come up with some recommendations that we would have to come back to Congress and to work out anyway. So why throw another step in there? Basically, it's to put off the decision, not to confront the issues today, but maybe leave it for next year after another election. I think it's time that we do what we say we're supposed to do, or what Congress is charged with doing, and that is to make the decisions. And we've had these problems since 1978 just because of issues like this. We're afraid to take a stand and make a decision.
Well, I'm curious.
First of all, Kathy, could I please respond?
Go ahead.
First of all, Rod needs to understand we're talking about our whole state. I never said a word.
I'm talking about
Let me finish. I never said a word about bitterness and hatred just in northern Minnesota. I talked about a state where you had regions pitted against one another in 1978. I think we can do better. Number 2, you don't understand before you condemn an alternative dispute resolution, understand all of the different environmental disputes that have been worked out around the country since 1978. Understand that a mediator doesn't tell people what to decide. Minnesotans sit down and they decide what we should do. And understand, Rod, what is the harm in asking, can I ask you this? What is the harm in asking people to come together and try to work something out? Why would you be opposed to that? If Bruce Vento and Jim Obastar can agree, and if people on both sides of the equation in northern Minnesota and metro Minnesota can agree it's worth giving it our best shot, why would you take exception to that?
Go ahead,
Why would
Senator
you not
Grant.
want to see that?
First of all, I understand, Paul. Second,
Why would you not want to see it?
Congressman Overstar has given just conditional support because he said, we'll listen, but he also admits that we have to go back to the legislation.
Well, let him answer.
Will
Let
you
him
not
answer.
support this?
Go ahead,
Will you
Senator
not
Grant.
support people coming together and trying to work this out?
We did this last year.
The hearings
We've
were
had
people-
all the hearings,
People
Paul.
came to hearings
See,
and people had different views.
Senator
This is not a
Wellstone-
Paul
hearing.
doesn't want to discuss
Senator-
this.
Why
He
would you
wants
not
to put
support
off the
this,
question.
Rod?
It's tough to go
because
pull
he
you guys
is
apart
afraid of
via
what is gonna
satellite here.
happen.
Senator
Why would you not
Wellstone.
want to support this? Why would you not want to support people sitting down at a
Kathy,
Senator
table?
We've
Wellstone.
had 18 years of this type of negotiations that have failed to address the concerns that people all
We've
across
never had
Minnesota
this. We've
have
never had alternative dispute
They
resolution.
have been told time and time
never
again.
Senator
had this,
Wellstone, I got a
Rod.
question for you. It's
You
tough
don't
to get this
understand what it
out
is.
via
You don't
satellite,
even know what it
Senator.
is.
Senator
Yeah.
Wellstone.
Yeah.
You just made a comment a couple minutes ago that it's been 18, 20 years where folks haven't talked to each other for 18 or 20 years. What makes you think they're going to talk now?
I feel good about it. I have met with people in northern Minnesota. This is what I'm most proud of. And I met with people in the metro area, and I have said, for the sake of our state, sit down and talk about some of the problems and talk about common
Okay.
ground. And you know what? I think people, you see the quotes. People are saying on both sides, Senator, we're willing to give it a try. And now my colleague is saying he condemns it before people have tried.
Well, no, it's my fault that this won't happen. This isn't going to answer any questions. And I'll tell you, there's labor people all across the state, there's environmentalists across the state that don't like this approach
Okay.
because they know it's a delay tactic.
It's very
We
good.
want some rational and just moderate corrections
Well,
to
let me
what
ask
was
you, Senator
originally
Graham.
talked about in 1970.
Senator Grams, why are
Yes.
you getting involved in this? Why
I don't
not let
know.
the
I'm-
Democrats argue among themselves about this?
Because, Kathy, for 20 years, they did not address the concerns that Minnesotans had. We were drawn into this because we were asked to hold these hearings. We held the hearings. We listened to the concerns that the people across the state had. Now we've drafted some legislation which we will be introducing tomorrow that is going to address these concerns, again, like I said, in just some moderate and rational corrections of the original intent of the 1970s Act. So this isn't a drastic overhaul of this bill, Kathy. This is just to address them and fine-tune some of the points that are in there and to also bring in Minnesotans into this process. When Paul talks about mediation, that's all we're trying to do is to make sure that local Minnesotans have a voice, have an input in how these parks are preserved. These are crown jewels. We know that. We want to preserve and protect them, but I think Minnesotans can make some good input, and that's what we're going to be proposing.
Well, they
in our
already
bill.
Rod, do you know what happened in 1978 when this went into the Congress? When people in Minnesota didn't sit down, rather than thinking they hated one another, in alternative dispute resolution and tried to work something out for Minnesota. I don't think people in Minnesota want to see us at war. I don't think they want to see the polarization. And I would say one more time, I am sticking to this process. I am proud of the fact that people on both sides are going to give it a try.
Senator,
As a senator, I am determined to bring people together, and I think something positive can come from it, much better than the bitterness and the politics and what will happen
what
in
will
Washington,
really
D.C.
come of the mediation, though? Congress can do whatever it wants,
They
I
can
would
only
assume.
make recommendations. It's got to come to Congress.
If you have the definition of, so that Rod understands what this is.
I need
In
to
alternative, you do. In alternative dispute resolution, we've seen it in New Mexico, we've seen it in Arizona, we saw it in Massachusetts, where people thought they couldn't agree. What happens is, by definition, the people on both sides have to agree. That's the role of the mediator, to bring people together. And when they agree, you've got recommendations with consensus from Minnesota. You've avoided some of the war that will take place, and that would have an excellent chance. Those changes
Very
could be
good.
administrative and legislative,
Final
and
word
they
from
would
Senator
pass.
Graham. Final word from Senator Graham's here. We have about 30 seconds.
Okay, well, Kathy, I just say that, you know, after 18 years of being ignored, and you asked how did we get involved with this, again, I just go back to, we got asked to come up there and hold some hearings. We did that. We tried to have input from everybody across the board. Thousands of people attended these hearings. We have drafted legislation, again, that are only going to make some modest and rational corrections on how to best have Minnesotans have input into the management of the lands that they love so much.
And that's a whole other
issue. I think that's
issue.
what we want to do.
And that's a whole other issue we didn't
That
get
is
to
a
talk
whole
to
other issue.
tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think the other banks, you know, if you didn't have a lot of money, they weren't really concerned that you would stay as their customer.